You're listening to the Cyberwire Network, powered by N2K.
Study and play come together on a Windows 11 PC. And for a limited time, college students get the best of both worlds. Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Caveat, N2K Cyberwire's privacy, surveillance, law, and policy podcast. I'm Dave Bittner, and joining me is my co-host Ben Yellen from the University of Maryland Center for Cyber Health and Hazard Strategies. Hey there, Ben.
Hello, Dave.
On today's show, Ben discusses how Sony's failed lawsuit against internet service providers could spell doom for other copyright lawsuits. I've got the story of how the EU's approach to AI might be informed by nuclear deterrence strategies. And later in the show, my conversation with Dr. Liz James, managing security consultant at NCC Group, discussing the new cybersecurity requirements in the EU's vehicle emissions regulations. While this show covers legal topics and Ben is a lawyer, the views expressed do not constitute legal advice. For official legal advice on any of the topics we cover, please contact your attorney. When it comes to mobile application security, good enough is a risk. A recent survey shows that 72% of organizations reported at least one mobile application security incident last year, and 92% of responders reported threat levels have increased in the past 2 years. GuardSquare delivers the highest level of security for your mobile apps without compromising performance, time to market, or user experience. Discover how GuardSquare provides industry-leading security for your Android and iOS apps at www.guardsquare.com. All right, Ben, we got some good stories to share this week. You want to start things off for us?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about internet piracy. Always a fun topic.
That goes way back.
It really does. I was an early adopter. For legal reasons, this is a fake story. I was an early adopter of Napster technology.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, and might have dabbled in a little bit of LimeWire, if you will.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure you didn't do as a very upstanding person.
No. And I definitely did not visit bulletin board systems back in the 80s.
I'm sure you did not. Yeah, I'm sure you did not.
Did not do that. No, never.
But this issue has come up because of a Supreme Court case that was decided a few weeks ago, Cox Communications versus Sony Music Entertainment. And it was a 9-0 decision, so unanimity among the Supreme Court justices.
Wow.
And this stems from the music industry, which is represented by Sony Music Entertainment here, their effort to curb online piracy. And they argue that Cox, which is a cable internet service provider, and other companies for that matter, should be held legally responsible for when users illegally download and share copyrighted music. So it's kind of the same theory that gets into these Section 230 debates where do you hold just the users accountable for illegal actions online, or should the providers bear some level of accountability?
Right.
What Sony Music Entertainment tried to argue in court, and they were successful at the district court level, was that Cox knew certain users were repeat infringers because they had received thousands of infringement notices.
Oh.
And once they received those notices, they took no action to terminate the account of those users. So that's why they were allegedly enabling piracy. A jury in that first federal district court case awarded a $1 billion verdict against Cox, which was one of the largest copyright damages awards in history. Anytime you see a verdict like that, where in a civil case where the damages are that high, like you should be a little bit skeptical because courts are very, very reluctant to allow those types of cases.
So does that mean when you see that, are you on a speed run to appeal?
Yes, absolutely. You got the red flag.
Right.
And sometimes it's just the court will bring down the damages amount. But in this case, they reversed the holding entirely once it got to the Supreme Court. Basically, the court clarified what the actual principle is. So just by providing a service that can be used by users for infringement, that's not enough to create legal liability. Basically, a company can only be liable in two separate circumstances. The first is if they're actually encouraging these types of copyright violations. That's known as legal inducement. And then second, if they are designing their service specifically for infringing users. So like that's kind of where you get into the Napster, LimeWire field. Because like at that time, there was no legal mechanism for using those. If you assumed that pirating music was illegal, like there was no Napster Plus where Sony Music Entertainment would get a cut of all of the sales for the songs that you downloaded from Napster.
Yeah.
And you don't have any of that in this case. Just because Cox, the cable company, didn't really do any enforcement, that doesn't mean that they cannot be held responsible for their users' actions. So why is this important? Basically, if you're Sony or if you're in the music industry, you don't really have a lot of options. The first is to go after individuals who pirate music.
Right.
And you remember those.
Oh, yeah.
You remember those cases, right?
Grandma's going to jail.
Exactly. And that was not really a great look for the music industry.
No. I'll add, and this is my own exasperation and bias here, that there were cases where people were getting sentences and fines for stealing music that were greater than murder.
Yes, they were. And it was like for relatively small amounts of songs.
Right.
I mean, the whole point was that they were trying to make an example out of people so that I, in my college dorm room, would think twice about downloading music on LimeWire.
Yes.
Which, of course, I did and did not download any more music on LimeWire.
No, because you're a good boy.
Because I'm a good person. Yeah.
That's right.
So that's not a very effective strategy. It's bad publicity. And, if you are one of the musicians or the bands that's targeting individuals as part of those lawsuits, that's a big PR hit. I mean, we all remember, I'm not going to name them, but we all remember the bands who fought tooth and nail against file sharing back in the day.
Right.
And, even though now as a grown man, I understand the perspective, at the time I was like, I'm not listening to those squares. Like, they're getting in the way of me downloading music.
Right.
So they tried this other strategy, which is to go after the intermediaries, the ISPs, and they failed. And that has broader implications. For one, now these companies know that they're they're clearly shielded from liability from when their users commit copyright infringement, even if they are aware of copyright infringement on their platforms. So that really doesn't give them much incentive to root out infringement. If they feel this sort of liability, then they're just not going to be inspired to take action or to suspend users because it's just not really in their interest. You'd rather have more users than fewer users. And if you can't be held legally liable, the more the merrier. Then there's the question of where this applies beyond music piracy. Even though this ruling was about internet providers, courts and other companies are now applying it to other technologies and platforms in different contexts. So there have been suits, and we're a month into this, from Google, Meta, X, formerly Twitter, and other companies citing this decision in other ongoing copyright disputes, that they think that this is now a Supreme Court precedent that you cannot hold us in any way liable for copyright infringements on your platform unless you can make this very unlikely showing of inducement or designing your service specifically for infringing purposes. And then the record labels have dropped their own comparable lawsuits against other ISPs. I mean, this was just one of many cases. So I think the strategy is dead here. The suing service providers for user piracy is something that's just not going to succeed. And it means that there isn't really secondary liability in copyright law. There had been hints from lower courts that perhaps there might have been a lighter standard that could have subjected these intermediaries to liability based on something like failure to act aggressively enough to stop it. And the Supreme Court has completely rejected that. You have to show clear intent. So this is just could have very wide implications. I think for people who care about internet piracy and copyright violations, this is a really, really tough case. And it's going to just make it a lot harder to hold these huge intermediaries, these very powerful companies, accountable for piracy that takes place on their platforms.
So I have a couple questions. First of all, should we be surprised? Are we surprised that this was a 9-0 vote from the Supreme Court?
Not really. You know, a lot of times in kind of, I don't want to say non-controversial because this is controversial, but if it's something that like doesn't fall neatly along ideological lines, they like to agree on things. Like they're very proud of themselves when they can get to a 9-0 decision.
I see.
And this was drafted by Justice Thomas.
Right.
I will say Justice Sotomayor wrote a concurrence joined by Justice Jackson where they said they agreed with the judgment, but they were concerned about the safe harbor provision under the Digital Millennium Copyrights Act.
Right.
Where basically companies were given that sort of safe harbor in that act as a way for them to try to deter intellectual property violations on their platforms. That would immunize them from lawsuits. But what's the point of a safe harbor provision if you can't be held liable in the first place, right? So now, like, it kind of renders that safe harbor provision moot. So Justices Sotomayor and Jackson commented on that, but they said there's still nothing in the record in this case that could impute liability on Sony. So not super surprising. I think the Supreme Court tries when they can to have some level of unanimity. And if you listen to interviews with Supreme Court justices, they'll say things like, and I don't know how true this is, but they don't like to be known only for their most controversial decisions on hot button issues. Like they love random intellectual property disputes or, insurance law, like things that are so obscure that they can just kind of get their law on.
Right.
And not worry about politics. And I kind of, knowing that they're probably huge nerds, I kind of take them at their word here.
Yeah. So before this came to court, before Sony sued Cox, from Cox's point of view, them turning a blind eye to this, is it plausible to think that they just didn't want to open the enforcement can of worms? In other words, like, if we get in the enforcement business here, we're going to have to look at everything. So let's look at nothing.
Yeah, I mean, before you had this case as precedent, I think that definitely could have been a concern. That if they started taking actions against some of their users, that might impute onto them some sort of constructive knowledge that piracy was happening on their platform, and that could subject them to liability for not rooting out every user committing piracy.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's enough support in the record here that they were aware of how many users were pirating music on their platform. So it's not like they can plead total ignorance. You're right that there is a degree of, if we open this can of worms, then there's going to be an expectation that we bear some legal responsibility, and we don't want there to be that expectation. Like,
right. It would have made the case
it
harder. Yeah. I mean, the case harder to defend if they could have been shown to have been paying attention to this in some sort of proactive way.
Now, I'm sure when the first judgment came out and they were going to be fined, or they were going to have to pay $1 billion, at that point, I'm sure they had second thoughts and they were like, oh, we should have had like a robust enforcement team going after every person.
Right.
And now they're like, oh, whew, all right. Compliance folks, enforcement team, you are moving on to something else.
Yeah.
You will no longer concern yourselves with music piracy. So congratulations. No more listening to, knockoffs of famous artists.
I mean, it's a big deal ruling, isn't it?
It's a huge deal. I think it's groundbreaking. It's a kind of a mortal blow to the music industry because, as we said, they don't really have many avenues to stop this from happening. The individual parties' attitude has not done them very much over the past decades. And now they've basically completely lost the strategy of targeting intermediaries. And so I don't know exactly where they turn. I mean, it's still a huge problem. If there are avenues for people to receive free music without subscribing to a platform where the artists are going to get a cut of the money, right? So the Spotifys or the Apple Music of the world. the long-term impact on the industry is going to be severe, just as I think the perspective was in the early 2000s. Like, it could be an existential threat if musicians, if talented artists don't think that they can reap the full rewards of their work. Maybe that disincentivizes them from putting 2 years in the studio and developing this great album. I hope we don't get. I hope and I don't think we're going to get to that point. But it certainly makes it much harder for the music industry. And incidentally, this is a big case for big tech because they faced a lot of potential litigation about copyright disputes on their platforms and whether they would have any degree of liability. I think having the Section 230 protection in other contexts, when we're talking about other recognizable legal harms like defamation or inducement to criminal activity, they knew they had that, but there was sort of this question of when it comes to copyrighted materials, like, are we being careful enough? Are we devoting a sufficient number of resources to rooting that stuff out?
Mm-hmm.
And now they know that they don't really have to, at least for the time being. I think it's a relief for big tech. I mean, they are always involved in so much litigation that this is just like one thing that they can at least temporarily take off their plate.
Right. Oh, it's interesting. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah, it really is. And it's one of those decisions that, like, unless you're in this space, it's not going to make news headlines. Like, we're not going to have protests on First Street across from the Supreme Court from any other music artists or bands or whatever as a result of this decision. But the implications are quite large.
I remember way back in the day, being scolded by a colleague of mine because I shared in a public forum that I had ripped a CD that I owned for playback on my iPod when all this was pretty new.
How dare you?
Right. They were like, they're going to come. My friend was like, watch what you say. They're going to come after you. And I was like, I bought the CD.
Right, it was my CD. Yeah.
Yeah, it was just the crazy early Wild West days of all this. And
I mean, I do think there was a short period where a lot of us were concerned that this was really going to be a thing. And I may or may not have had a pretty substantial library of songs that I had pirated from other users. And like that definitely exposed me, if I had done such a thing, to legal liability. And I think the platforms for a couple of years really tried to experiment with, we can't sue everybody who does this, but like, let's pick out a few people and make examples out of them. And that's just such a fraught strategy in so many different ways, especially because civil juries are very fickle. And if it feels like you're going after, like you're trying to bully some, 13-year-old kid who didn't know better, that's the worst type of publicity for your company. And it's probably worse for you in the long run than not doing anything at all.
Yeah.
On the other hand, like suing Cox Communications, like that's not going to be a PR hit. No one cares about Cox Communications unless you work for Cox Communications.
Right.
So I think from their perspective, like, this would have been the dream. If we can stop this type of piracy without these very damaging lawsuits, like that would be a great avenue for us. And they don't have it now. I
understand the motivation of the music companies, obviously, but at the same time, I think it's folly to think that stopping the pirates will lead to a one-to-one increase in sales. I think it's just not the way it works.
It's not the way it works. And I think like they've started to figure out a model where they can still make money and not have that sort of obsession with, if we have music police who stop every single instance of online piracy, then sales of our compact discs will be the same that they were in the early 1990s. Like, we're not going back there.
Nobody's paying $18 for an album anymore.
They are not. And I think, like, I'm sure a lot of artists aren't thrilled that we have the Spotify revolution where...
No. I mean, the income is from touring now and performing live, not from the sale of your albums. It's, unless you are a huge name, it's just not the same.
It's just not. And not every group is a good touring group. It's not conducive for a lot of different types of music that people like. I would go to a Yo-Yo Ma concert, for example, because I love that music. But like, there are a lot of classical musicians who aren't going to go on extremely lucrative tours. And it ends up really, really hurting them. And if that drives people out of the industry, that's really bad because we lose out on music.
Yeah. It's funny. We were talking. My family were talking. We went to a concert at our local Baltimore Symphony. They were doing a night of John Williams music, right? Which is wonderful,
incredible,
right?
Yeah.
And sells out, right? But like that's and the old school classical people, and I'm sure some of the musicians on the stage are probably turning their noses up at that, poo-pooing. They're not doing Beethoven, Bach, and Mozart, but the John Williams night is what keeps the doors open, right?
Oh yeah,
it's what pays the bills. So it's a business.
The true fans are going to the John Williams concert. Did he do the Olympic theme song?
Oh, they did so many good things.
Because that's a banger. I mean, obviously we know Star Wars and
Jurassic Park. I mean, it's just so many good ones. Yeah,
he's in his 90s now, right? We gotta cherish John Williams as long as we have him.
No, he's. There's an argument to be made that John Williams is the most well-known composer in history.
I totally buy into that argument.
Yeah. All right.
And we digress.
Yeah. All right. We will have a link to Ben's story in the show notes. My story this week, this is an interesting one for me. I love it when I come across something that I have not heard of nor considered and makes me lean back in my chair and go, huh. This is one of those articles. This is from the good folks over at Lawfare Media, and it's titled How Nuclear Deterrence Can Inform Europe's AI Strategy. So
Doesn't this sound like a chatbot creating like an Atlantic article?
I hope not.
Anyway, it's a real article.
Yeah. Somehow I think the folks over at Lawfare would recoil at your...
I'm just kidding, Lawfare. Love you guys. This is great.
Right. So we are in this mode right now where Europe in particular is seeking out digital sovereignty from the United States. So because of many of the things that have been going on politically, a lot of our allies have said to themselves, perhaps the United States is not the reliable partner that it always has been since the end of World War II. So maybe we need to look at ways to decouple ourselves from some of these large U.S. tech companies. And that, in a lot of ways, that's easier said than done, right? These big tech companies, there's only a handful of them. They have the big data centers. And so for European companies to spin up their own versions of that is quite expensive and hard to do. So this article argues that instead of going after AI sovereignty, they could instead pursue what they're calling AI latency, which is, I learned, a concept that's borrowed from nuclear deterrence theory. And what this means is that what you want to do is maintain the capacity to rapidly build or adapt a good enough AI model during a crisis. So you have a geopolitical or an economic crisis, but there's no need to dominate the frontier. There's no need to try to put yourself in the position of being a front runner against these international rivals. Basically, you just have to have enough in place so that should something bad happen, you can spin things up relatively quickly.
So the comparison they give here, which I think is very interesting, is Japan's latent nuclear capability.
Right.
So they don't possess ready-made nuclear weapons ready to fire if there's some, kinetic conflict with North Korea. But they have the industrial base and expertise to quickly build them if needed, or possibly to purchase them from other allies. And I think that's the metaphor here is you don't have to dollar for dollar be as competitive as China and the United States because you can't. These are smaller countries who would be a larger percentage of their economy if they were to similarly invest in data centers. But if you are at the ready so that if something does happen that threatens your sovereignty, that you can be nimble and you could bring things up to scale quickly, that's the next best option.
Right. And I think also sharing across the EU, or coming at this in an informed way of saying, okay, you this particular EU member, you're going to have assets when it comes to this part of this, and we're going to have assets when it comes to that part of this. And so should something bad happen, if something bad happens to you, then we will provide our resources. And this article proposes something very much like NATO, and NATO Article 5 trigger mechanism for an AI crisis, that, a need of one is a need of all.
Yeah. I understand that as a metaphor, but there's one very important piece missing from this that's not missing from NATO. The good old United States of America, at least as of this recording.
Right.
Although Congress recently passed a bill in the Biden era that prevents the president from unilaterally leaving NATO.
Oh, so good to know.
Congress would need to get involved. You know what this really makes me think of is the speech by Prime Minister Mark Carney of Canada that he gave in Davos about how we are in a new era. And the global order for kind of these secondary powers, like Canada and most EU countries, was like let the United States, with their massive amount of resources, build up military capabilities and industrial capabilities, and it'll be good for everybody. We'll ally with them. They can be our trading partner. And so we'll be in good shape as long as we don't, make them angry. And I think the second Trump era has forced them to rethink that relationship.
Yeah.
And they've done so in ways that might not be great for the United States. Canada, for example, is pursuing trade partnerships with China and Russia that they might not have done if not for the Trump antagonism. But I think that's kind of what they're trying to do here, is to reconsider their geopolitical relationship with the United States and try to do things more independently. But I think you can't rely on latency to replace what the role that the U.S. plays in NATO, for example. Like, you actually have to have full-on capabilities because, and I don't know what the best way to explain this is, if you have to have some type of rapid buildup of your AI capability, you're going to want some of the resources of the world's superpowers. And if those are not available to you, if you are relying on one another for that buildup, but none of you have made the long-term investments, then I just don't know if that's going to work.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. And I guess part of it could be other alliances, if they could have a treaty with China or, any of the other big players in these spaces that are developing these AI models. But I don't know. I just thought it was an interesting take. I was not familiar with this concept of latent nuclear capability. This part you pointed out about Japan, that was new to me. So I was very interested to learn about that. And this was an angle I hadn't really thought about. So I thought this was an interesting take from Lawfare.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's a really, really interesting comparison. It's also designed to take advantage of the fact that a lot of individual European countries have strengths in the AI sphere. So they talk, for example, about how Germany has the Sovereign Tech Agency. UK has incubators for AI and the AI Security Institute.
Right.
So you can leverage the fact that among this larger group of countries, I don't know if the UK is going to be a part of that, considering, everything. But when you put together this larger group of countries, they have a sufficient amount of resources that they can help one another.
Right.
But, does this model work without the one superpower who comes in with the money and the firepower? Maybe it does. I don't know. Or maybe it doesn't. And instead of relying on the United States, they are going to go to China, which would probably be very bad for us. But I think, from Europe's perspective, that's better as a long-term strategic goal than spending money they might not ever use now on hypercharging their AI capacity.
Yeah, no question they've had to recalibrate a lot of long-held expectations. All right, we will have a link to that story in the show notes. And of course, we would love to hear from you. If there's something you'd like us to consider for the show, you can email us, It's caveat at n2k.com. Let's take a quick break here to hear from our show sponsor. We'll be right back after this message. Most environments trust far more than they should, and attackers know it. ThreatLocker solves that by enforcing default deny at the point of execution. With ThreatLocker Allow listing, you stop unknown executables cold. With ring fencing, you control how trusted applications behave. And with ThreatLocker DAC, Defense Against Configurations, you get real assurance that your environment is free of misconfigurations and clear visibility into whether you meet compliance standards. ThreatLocker is the simplest way to enforce zero-trust principles without the operational pain. It's powerful protection that gives CISOs real visibility, real control, and real peace of mind. ThreatLocker makes zero trust attainable, even for small security teams. See why thousands of organizations choose ThreatLocker to minimize alert fatigue, stop ransomware at the source, and regain control over their environments. Schedule your demo at threatlocker.com/N2K today. And we are back. Ben, I recently had the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Liz James, who is Managing Security Consultant at the Cybersecurity Consultancy NCC Group. And we're discussing some of the new cybersecurity requirements that are part of the EU's vehicle emissions regulations. Here's my conversation with Dr. Liz James.
So I suppose there are kind of two stories to really focus on here when you're looking at emissions regulations. The first is the general transition towards electrification and the need to keep a track of emissions in general, so that we can determine whether any policies are making kind of good on their claims. And the other side is actually a kind of auditing and measurement quality perspective. So I hesitate to point specifically at incidents, but
well, that's going to be my next question.
Yeah.
Was to what degree was this a response to the things that went on with Volkswagen?
So I think there's definitely an element of how do we ensure, as a regulator and as an organization that the European Union is, how do we ensure that the information we're gathering really kind of is accurate, that we can keep a track of it across the full lifetime of a vehicle. So I suspect Dieselgate played a part in the motivation. How the questions and how that's actually been adapted into the new regulation, I don't see there being any specific call-outs to it. It's not like this specific scenario is a thing.
Sure.
But it's how do we be robust against potential tampering modification?
Well, take us through what this entails. What changes are we looking at here?
So fundamentally, there's the Euro 7 kind of regulation as a whole. Within that, and so again, there's a lot of different kind of safety elements. There's emissions and monitoring requirements on the manufacturers. And our bit, or the bit that we've been focusing on, is the cybersecurity and anti-tampering and kind of components to this. Now, it's quite common and I'm sure there's a large audience of people that will be talking about how they've modified their calibrations in vehicles to get better performance, the tuning of parts. And the big picture is that actually we want to be able to make sure that the information that we're gathering is accurate end to end across the life cycle of the vehicle. So not just is it fine when we release it out onto the market, but are these fleets of vehicles actually emitting as we expect them to do as they go out throughout their life, so we can do forecasts and be a bit more accurate with it.
Well, help me understand here, because I would say in the last decade or so, for me locally, when I go to get my vehicle tested for emissions, where it used to be they would put a sensor near the tailpipe, now I just plug something into the ODB2 port, I believe it is, and the vehicle kind of self-reports. Is that part of what we're talking about here, to make sure that self-reporting is legitimate?
So that's definitely one of the routes that exists in the emissions regulations. So capturing the information from the vehicle itself is absolutely part of this. Giving the regulators the ability to plug in at any time and get the standardized information. That is, as you've already said, already part of it. So that's nothing new. It's about pushing the trust and the integrity as far as you possibly can, or at least what's reasonably achievable. Because again, there are other regulations involved around like right to repair and the kind of trade-offs there. So it's more about the kind of, can we trust the information that's coming out of that vehicle? And then the other side of that is, who do you tell? Like, if you're a manufacturer of products, how do we track the information of that vehicle throughout its life cycle? Who's reporting? Who's responsible for reporting? How is that information gathered? Because on an individual basis, that's fine. But at the kind of market level, we want to know this particular product category, this particular product kind of stock keeping unit has emitted this much so far.
So when it comes to the actual cybersecurity and the anti-tampering measures that will be put in place here, how is that being implemented?
So, and this is one of the kind of important things to kind of really ingest, is that this is more about goal and risk management regulation than it is specific, you have to do this. There are no big tick boxes, though, again, it depends on how the regulators wish to enforce the goals. We're talking more about, have you considered this threat? The threat to tampering, the threat to data modification, the threat to, I'm just trying to come up with a good example, but have you incorporated those threats into your existing security management system? And is that, like, have you reduced the risks attached to that to as low as reasonably achievable? The regulator then will look at that information and go, that's sufficient, that's not. So we're still at that stage where we don't quite know what it's going to look like, but there are lots of things we can kind of forecast based on the earlier adoption of cybersecurity management systems.
And what about for manufacturers who are going to be selling into the EU? How is this going to affect them?
So if they're already selling into the EU, nothing really changes other than the specific scenarios they need to consider. So if you're already selling into the European Union, you already have to have a cybersecurity management system, medium scale, and anyone producing vehicles at a large enough scale. They already have to have a cybersecurity management system. They already have to have a certificate of compliance as their organization is managing risk properly. All they need to do is introduce new controls or show how their existing controls address the threats.
Now, we're talking about this shift towards continuous evidence. How does that play out? And how is there a reporting mechanism here?
So there's absolutely a reporting mechanism here. How that materially pans out is a whole other question. And it's not something I've gone into in depth. But broadly, most modern vehicles have telemetry or telematics systems baked in, ensuring that the information, when it gets gathered by the OEM, is then packaged and prepared for the regulators to see, is kind of the whole life cycle piece. Obviously, we've mentioned the OBD2 ports and standard on-vehicle diagnostics. So we now have the ability to collate and curate emissions and energy use. So again, it's not just emissions, it's also energy use, and that's an important part of the electric vehicle transition too. We have that kind of fleet level view, and then we retain the individual vehicle level review.
Now, is the focus here more on fleets, or is it on individual consumers, or a balance of both?
So, I mean, as with most cybersecurity kind of controls at the moment, I don't think the individual consumer need really be affected by it. I think there's definitely a place for communicating better. This is from a manufacturer perspective, about what benefits does the consumer get for a more, and you can't see me, but the air quotes of secure product,
Right.
and like what are the ramifications of this data collection, and understanding those kind of the pros and cons. So from an individual consumer perspective, there's definitely a picture there. From a fleet and logistics and kind of bigger picture view, it's really important that we keep a track of where the energy that we're consuming is going, where the emissions are coming from. If we then expand the view a bit further from just the OEMs, there are also security ramifications attached to critical national infrastructure, the logistics and transport industry in general. So is this more of an issue of fleets? Yes. Will it have some degree of impact on the individual? Also yes, but to a much lesser degree.
I'm just thinking about, as I think you mentioned at the outset, modders, people who want to soup up their cars or, what do they call it, chipping the car. I suppose they'll face some challenges with this sort of thing if they're being audited on a regular basis.
So this is where you get into the interests of this regulation doesn't mandate that you adopt a specific control. It mandates that you've understood the risk and you have made a determination about what controls you're going to apply. Now, in the European Union, and actually also in the US, in certain states especially, the right to repair, the ability to change out sensors, emission sensors, maybe not chip tuning, where you replace the parts, that might be a bit too far. But modification of sensors, which is absolutely the next step, right? If it's easy to change the software and they've now made it harder to change the software, the next step for these kind of enthusiasts will be modifying the sensors so that the system assumes it's reporting correctly and it's reporting more or less, depending on your objective. Now, you can't really mitigate that threat all the way. So it's not about stopping someone from doing this. It's more about if we're trying to make decisions based on this data, how much can we trust it?
How is this being received by industry?
That's a really good question. So NCC Group works with a broad range of kind of manufacturers, the OEMs, but also the tier one, kind of the bigger supply chain. I wouldn't say that we're seeing anything that's negative from these. In fact, it feels like quite a logical extension from the previous kind of Regulation 155 and 156, which talks about security management systems and software update management systems. So I don't think this is necessarily a out of left field, nor does it really kind of change anything material. It's more about expanding the range of considerations.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. As you say, it seems like the onboard technology, pre-existing onboard technology has sort of led to a place where we're able to enable this without a whole lot of effort. You said you have the onboard telematics, the sensors are there, the software. It makes it not such a heavy lift.
I think that's a reasonable kind of inference. And obviously, there's definitely challenges with anonymizing the data, ensuring that we're not tracking individuals or that information can't be used against the owners of products. That's it's a well-studied and well-trodden field, but that's a risk attached, potentially. It is kind of a logical continuation, and the motivations for the regulation are around keeping a track of what we're emitting into the environment, which, in my position, doesn't seem like a bad thing. So it doesn't seem like a blocker in any way.
All right, Ben, interesting stuff. What do you think?
Yeah, really interesting. I just kind of wasn't really familiar with this EU regulation, this emissions regulation, and it's really promising how they're just kind of fitting cybersecurity into the making of these vehicles and making it part of the life cycle of developing these vehicles. And I'm kind of jealous, to be honest. I don't see this as something that would happen in the near future in the United States. So kudos to our friends across the pond.
Well, I mean, kind of like GDPR, right? Europe is leading the way.
Or
with some of these
the
things.
EU AI Act, for that matter.
Right,
Yep.
right. maybe that's an urgent message from your CEO, or maybe it's a deepfake trying to target your business. Doppel is the AI-native social engineering defense platform fighting back against impersonation and manipulation. As attackers use AI to make their tactics more sophisticated, Doppel uses it to fight back, from automatically dismantling cross-channel attacks to building team resilience and more. Doppel, outpacing what's next in social engineering. Learn more at doppel.com. That's DOPPEL.com. And that is Caveat, brought to you by N2K Cyberwire. We'd love to know what you think of this podcast. Your feedback ensures we deliver the insights that keep you a step ahead in the rapidly changing world of cybersecurity. If you like our show, please share a rating and review in your favorite podcast app. Please also fill out the survey in the show notes or send an email to caveat@n2k.com. This episode is produced by Liz Stokes. Our executive producer is Jennifer Iben. The show is mixed by Trey Hester. Peter Kilpie is our publisher. I'm Dave Bittner.
And I'm Ben Yellen.
Thanks for listening.